At Sri Ramakrishna's feet, page 21, third paragraph down. One summer noon on an Ekadashi day, Ekadashi is Tuesdays and Saturdays or Tuesdays, I'm not sure which, of the new moon or the full moon, and it's a day when most people fast. One summer noon on an Ekadashi day, Gangadhar, with one end of his wearing cloth thrown over his shoulder, went to Dakshineshwar with a watermelon for the master. The master was very glad to receive the gift. On being asked, Gangadhar said he would not be going home right away. The master then went to the Panchavati, and Gangadhar followed, carrying his water vessel. The master seated him in the Panchavati with his face to the east and left him there to meditate. When Sri Ramakrishna returned, he gave the boy some instructions on meditation and took him to his room. After his bath in the Ganga, Sri Ramakrishna stood before the picture of the mother of Kaligat, put a few grains of the carefully preserved prasad, offered food, of the mother into his mouth and gave some to Gangadhar. Then he repeated, Om Kali, and gently clapping his hands near his breast, remained for quite a while with his eyes half closed. Then the prasad of the Kali and Vishnu temples was brought to him, and he took a little of it and gave the rest to Gangadhar. Later, when the midday worship at the temples was finished, Sri Ramakrishna took the boy to the eastern veranda, facing the large interior court, and said, Go, take the prasad of Mother Kali. It is very pure, cooked with Ganga water. As Gangadhar walked toward the court, he looked back to find the master watching to see to which temple he was going. Meanwhile, Gangadhar, a strict vegetarian, was thinking that the master could have told him to go to the Vishnu temple, but instead he had directed him to the Kali temple, where fish and other non-vegetarian dishes were offered. The boy nevertheless went to the Kali temple, but partook only of the vegetarian food. When he came back, the master was waiting for him with a betel roll in his hand. He told Gangadhar to take one or two of them after meals to sweeten his breath. He said, Narayan takes 100 beetles and eats whatever he gets. His eyes are large and indrawn. When passing through the streets of Calcutta, he sees everything merged in Narayan. Go and meet him. He lives in Simla. Gangadhar was eager to meet Narayan. The very next day he went to Narayan's home and found him absorbed in a big book, unmindful of his surroundings. Gangadhar was charmed to see the grave but affectionate look on his face. The master has sent me to see you, he told Narayan, who, after a few words, said, So, you have met the master. Do come again. The next time Gangadhar visited Dakshineshwar, the master asked him, Did you meet Narayan? Gangadhar replied, Yes. What you said of him is quite true. The master said, Meeting him only once, how could you know so much? I saw those large eyes of his, Gangadhar continued. He was reading a large English book. His room was in a disorderly state, with all sorts of things scattered about, but he took no notice of it. He seemed to be in another world. An experienced housewife knows the lid for each pot. So is the case of Gangadhar's meeting with Narayan. He understood Narayan's dispassionate attitude. The master said, Go to him often and cultivate his company. The boy took these words as a command from the master. This incident gives an indication of his mental disposition and the direction of his future life. Constant association with Sri Ramakrishna gradually brought about in Gangadhar a spiritual awakening. One night, when he was present at Dakshineshwar, the master instructed all his young disciples to go to sit and meditate. In meditation, the boys soon lost themselves in spiritual communion, now talking, now laughing, and again shedding tears. After meditation, the master asked, "Did tears come to your eyes when you meditated and prayed?" When Gangadhar answered yes, how pleased the master was. He said, "Tears of repentance fall from the corners of the eyes, close to the nose, but tears of love flow from the outer corners." "Do you know how to pray?" the master asked him one day. Like a disconsolate child, he began to weep and pray. "Mother, give me knowledge, give me devotion. I want nothing else, Mother." His cloth had slipped off, and he appeared to Gangadhar just like a child. With tears flowing from his eyes, the master passed into samadhi. Gangadhar felt certain that the master had prayed in this manner, just as a lesson for him. Gangadhar took every opportunity to meet the master at Dakshineshwar, or at the houses of his devotees in Calcutta. Sometimes he accompanied him to Calcutta. At Adhar Sen's house, he met the famous author-patriot Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, who had once enjoyed a lively discussion with the master on religion, philosophy, and the aim of life. At Bagbazar in Balaram Bosa's house, he witnessed some unforgettable scenes of the master's ecstatic moods. One morning, the master went to Balaram's house. Many of his devotees soon gathered around him. The place was packed. Suddenly, the master stood up and began to sing and dance with great fervor. The devotees were deeply affected. Some cried, some laughed, others meditated. There were some whose hair was standing on end. Indeed, it was a strange sight. Those who had come only to see some fun went away saying, "Oh, how the Paramahamsa calls on the mother. It pierces the very depths of the heart." Another morning, the master was on the first floor of Balaram's house. Devotees sat close by him. Gangadhar went there and bowed to him and sat nearby. The master was indrawn and could hardly speak. He was absorbed in a deep spiritual mood. In this state, he began to relate his experiences with Ramlala. Now, that's the metal image of the boy Rama, which was a living presence for the master. He began to narrate his experiences of Ramlala and of his parental love for the child, and how he bathed it, and of the pranks the child had played. He spoke a long time in this way, and then, after a short silence, he was once more deeply absorbed. He began to address the mother, saying, "O mother, how can I offer you my heart, my soul? You yourself are my heart and soul." He continued speaking in this way for some time. When the mood passed, he clenched his fist and held it before him. With half-closed eyes and still in an exalted state, Sri Ramakrishna began to repeat to himself, "Fie, fie, those attached to lust and greed will attain nothing." He spat on his closed fist till the coverlet on which he sat was very wet. The ideals of divine love and renunciation that Sri Ramakrishna expressed in so impressive a manner on that day remained with Gangadhar, a never-failing lesson for life. On another day at Dakshineshwar, Gangadhar noticed the master's mind constantly drawn inward. When he spoke, he began to talk about God and the self. One's ishta chosen ideal, is one's own self. The two are identical. When you see your Ishta, you see the self. And with the realization of the self, you see your Ishta. That's self with a capital S. Sometimes he would say, not I, not I. Again he would say, I am thy servant, I am thy servant. And sometimes, thou art I, thou art I. Saying thus, the master remained silent. One night, Gangadhar and Harish, another disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, slept on the northern veranda of the master's room. The veranda was enclosed with bamboo screens. Gangadhar lay on the cot to the east and Harish on the other side. Long before daybreak, the master began to utter the holy mantra Om and was immersed in samadhi. Harish kept repeating sweetly, Durga, Durga, Shiva, Shiva, Durga, Durga, remover of miseries, Shiva, Shiva, Durga. At that auspicious hour in the serene atmosphere of Dakshineshwar, filled with the silence of meditation, it appeared to the young Gangadhar that everything was in samadhi. The master's room, the sky, the air, everything. God's presence was tangibly felt everywhere. Silently and without his being aware of it, the young disciple's life was being molded. Whenever Gangadhar stood outside the shrine of Kali, he would only see the matted golden hair of the recumbent figure of Shiva. The face could not be seen. Sri Ramakrishna was aware of the boy's particular devotion to Lord Shiva. One morning, after the boy had spent the night at Dakshineshwar, the master very affectionately took him inside the shrine and said, "See, Shiva, full of consciousness." The boy saw the image of Lord Shiva living and breathing. "Look how Shiva, full of life and consciousness, is lying down," continued the master. Gangadhar perceived this to be actually so. In his reminiscences, he writes, "All these days I had taken this Shiva to be the same sort of image one sees everywhere. But what was this? I was seeing Shiva full of life and consciousness. The joy that the Master showered on me can never be expressed. It can only be felt. How can I describe the joy of that day? Oh, the wonder the Master showed me. How that day passed I cannot say. That day, too, the Master sang many songs of divine transport." As he lay on his cot one day, the Master asked Gangadhar to rub his feet. While he massaged, he touched the Master's feet at times with his forehead. The Master asked what was he doing. Gangadhar said he was putting on his head the invisible marks of purity of which Sri Ramakrishna's feet were the source. Speaking in later days of those times, Gangadhar would say, "Thrice blessed are those who sat at the Master's feet or held those holy feet in their laps." His room was surcharged with spirituality, with a divine bliss. All who came felt it, more or less. To sit in his room would give one the fruit of 100 years of austerities. He was almost always in ecstasy or in samadhi. Can one ever forget it? One word was enough to explain 100 texts from the Vedas or the Vedanta. It was all joy to be with Sri Ramakrishna at Dakshineshwar, at the feet of the Divine Mother beside the Ganga. There was a wonderful gathering there of the Master's world-renowned disciples, Narendra, Rakal, Sarat, Shashi, Tarak, Yogan, Kali, Babaram, and others. These were all the ones who became the first monk disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Sri Ramakrishna was affectionately leading them towards a new sadhana of a new age. Meanwhile, Gangadhar had become, as the master decided, quite intimate with Narendra and had begun visiting him often. In April 1885, Sri Ramakrishna's throat had begun to give him pain. However, his first concern was the welfare of his devotees. One day he was lying on his smaller cot when M, along with Gangadhar, arrived and sat down at his feet. After a little talk about the treatment of his throat condition, diagnosed later as cancer, the conversation turned to the welfare of the devotees. Gangadhar and his friend Harinath spent the greater part of their nights in solitude on the bank of the Ganga between the Bagbazar Canal and Kumartuli. They spent the hours talking about their master or meditating. Nag Mahashai lived in a small room near Kumartuli at this time. He was a unique householder devotee of the master. He always sat absorbed in meditation at a secluded place on the Ganga below a landing ghat. Gangadhar and Harinath on still nights would stand watching him, merged in meditation. Gangadhar continued his studies, but his father, Srimanta, noticed his lack of interest and found him employment in a merchant's office. But Gangadhar soon left the job. For a time, he tutored M's son, and this suited his mode of life better. Sri Ramakrishna now had to be taken to Shampugor for better treatment and nursing. Later, for his convenience, he was transferred to the garden house at Kasipur. The devotees under Narendranath's leadership devoted themselves heart and soul to the master's service. Some of them stayed at the garden house. Gangadhar went almost every day and often spent the night. He washed the master's plates and carried out other orders given to him by his elders. The expenses incurred by the rental of the Kasipur garden house, food, and medical care were borne by the householder disciples. On one occasion, Gangadhar heard the master telling his attendants, "Look, this money has been earned by the householders with much labor. Never misuse it. Some people come here because they do not have to pay anything." One day, a devotee engaged in conversations in the master's room said, I know. The master was lying on his bed. Nonetheless, supporting himself with his hand, he raised his head from the pillow and said, "What do you say I know? Never say it again. What do you know? Say, as long as I live, I learn, friend. He who says I know, knows not. He who says I don't know, might be knowing something. Infinite is knowledge. How much do you know?" As he was speaking, blood oozed from the sore in his throat. After seeing this sight, those devotees never again uttered such words. On the 1st of January, 1886, Sri Ramakrishna freely showered his blessings on a number of householder disciples with the words, "Be enlightened." A few days later, the elder Gopal brought 12 dhotis dyed in ochre to the master, saying, "I would like to offer these to sadhus going to the Ganga Sagar fair." It's the annual meeting where the Ganga meets the Bay of Bengal. "Why go elsewhere?" said the master. "There are many good sadhus right here." That day, Sri Ramakrishna gave these ochre cloths to 11 of his disciples, beginning with Narendra. One was kept for Girish. Gangadhar and Harinath received the ochre cloth from the master's hands some days later. These they preserved as a blessing from their guru and did not wear them at the time. One midnight, while engaged in his spiritual practices on the bank of the Ganga, Gangadhar heard a watchman singing a devotional song. He was so charmed that he paused to listen to the whole song. On his return to the garden house, he repeated a line or two of it to Narendra, who then asked for the whole song. The next night, Gangadhar met the watchman at the Bagh Bazaar bridge and wrote down the whole song for Narendra. It was a Sufi song. In April 1886, Gangadhar was nursing a cholera patient at the residence of M. One of M's sons had already succumbed to the disease, and his wife was almost mad with grief. Dr. Mahendralal Sakar visited the patient. He left a dose of medicine with Gangadhar and told him, "Give this to the patient at 1 o'clock at night when he begins to hiccup." To Gangadhar's surprise, the hiccup began exactly as the doctor had said, and the medicine was given. He nursed the patient for some days with such care that the grief-stricken parents became pacified and hopeful. For 5 long months, the master was under careful treatment, but without any improvement. The master would say with a smile, "Leave the body and suffering to themselves. You, my mind, remain in joy." One day in the latter half of the Bengali month of Shravana, August, the master asked that the almanac be read to him, thus giving a hint of his final departure. It was Sunday, the last day of Shravana. The master's abnormal pulse filled the attendants with concern. At sunset, his breathing became difficult. The master felt hungry, took a little liquid food, and fell into samadhi. At 1 o'clock at night, he again ate a little and then entered into deep samadhi. It was the 16th of August, 1886. The master often passed into these indrawn states and remained in them for long periods. The devotees had often noticed this and thought this to be a similar case. Colonel Vishwanath Upadhyaya of Nepal, a devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, advised rubbing ghee on the spine, and Gangadhar did so throughout the night. In the morning, the master's condition was unchanged. Dr. Mahendralal Sakar examined the body and declared that the master had left it. But Colonel Upadhyaya, touching the spine and finding it warm, said that Mahasamadhi had not yet taken place. The devotees were left wondering. Ghee was still being applied. Gradually, however, the spine became colder. With tearful eyes, the devotees began to prepare for the last rites. In the afternoon, the devotees adorned the divine body with flowers and sandal paste and carried it to the Kasipur cremation ground on the Ganga, singing as they went, Hari Harye Namah, Krishna Yadaya Namah, Yadavaya, Madhavaya, Keshavaya Namah. Salutations to Hari, to Krishna, to Yadava Madhava Keshava. The holy body in samadhi, besmeared with ghee, was then consumed by the flames. A copper vessel containing some of the holy ashes was preserved and carried by the devotees to the Kasipur garden house and carefully kept in the master's room. On Janmashtami day, the birthday of Sri Krishna, the copper vessel with the holy ashes was carried by the devotees to Kankargachi Yodadhyana and buried there. Kankargachi is a garden house on the eastern suburb of Calcutta, belonging to Ramchandra Datta, a householder disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. Gangadhar was one of those who buried the vessel who carried the vessel for some distance. Another vessel was taken to Balaram Bosa's house. The cremation ground of Kasipur will bear the witness for ages to come of the vivid and painful memory of this last scene in the earthly life of Sri Ramakrishna, the God-intoxicated man of Dakshineshwar. The tears of his devotees and the cooling water of the Ganga extinguished the pyre that day, but the flame of love and renunciation, which he lit in the hearts of his devotees, blazed up with a fresh and all-consuming ardor. Selfish desires and worldly fame were all offered as oblations to that holy flame. Okay, and we're going to stop there because we're going to start next week on the call of the Himalayas. And this is actually where Swami Akhandananda's life takes its own unique turn. This is the chapter where we are going to have a ton of names of places. And then the next chapter in the Tibet and Himalayas will have even more names of places, which, as I say, if you want to get a map and look them up, be my guest. They're very, there's a lot of villages up there. Okay. As you know, Saturday we will be having Durga Puja. It will start at 11 o'clock, followed by a flower offering and then prasad. We are doing the Jai Sri Durga chanting if you signed up for it. It will end on Tuesday the 24th. And then if those of you that signed up could let me know how many you actually did. Swami says we sign up for some, but some actually do quite a few more. He doesn't say that some actually don't get quite caught up. But whatever you do is wonderful. Sunday night, the 22nd, right after the next day from Durga Puja. Well, Sunday, Swami will give a talk, Worship God as Mother. Then that night in the temple, at 7:34, we will sit here in the temple and all chant Jai Sri Durga aloud. We will chant it until 8:22. This, as Vrajaprana told you in her lecture, this is the height of the battle between Ma Durga and Mahishasura, and we are cheering her on to victory. Okay, so we hope to see all of you either in person or on Zoom, and have a wonderful rest of the week. And join us if you can't join us in person. Join us on Zoom for the puja. Okay? All right. We're going to. Any questions about what we read? I forgot to ask that. Comments? That's probably one of the. One of the good, fairly detailed accounts of Sri Ramakrishna's death. How they really didn't know whether he had gone or not because of his repeated samadhis. And when I first read that, I know I was unaware of the fact that they felt the spine to see if it was warm, which was interesting to me. But it was something I was not aware of, you know. So we'll end with a chant if there's no comments. Okay. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Right. See you all. And take care.